My neighborhood is a typical American suburbia. Most homes are 1 to 2 story houses. Everywhere you look, you see lawns, car garages, and driveways. You get my drift. Anyway, our town is connected to other suburban towns by a long stretch of roads that barely get any traffic. So we're surrounded by empty terrains, and things are very quiet around here. One night in 2018, we had something exciting happen to our sleepy town. Maybe I should use the word terrifying instead of exciting, but we'll get to that later. So on that exciting/terrifying night, we had a blackout. The time was around 10 p.m., and I remember that I was writing an email to my ex-girlfriend. If you're curious, I was trying to get her back and was writing a long, sobby, sentimental message about why she should come back to me. I know, pathetic. But yeah, the power went out right before I was nearly done with the email. It was pitch black all around the neighborhood. Some of the houses still had garden lights shining since many of them run and get charged by solar cells. Even so, they're dim and really don't provide much illumination on their own. I stepped out of the house while mom and dad were busy looking for candles and flashlights. As I walked around the town, people began coming out one by one, naturally gathering in groups to speak to one another. Sometime later, I walked for about 5 minutes before turning back to go home. That's when I heard something buzz past my head, followed by loud noises of what I could only describe as total destruction. I heard pop, pop, pop continuously, but at the same time, I could hear things breaking, cracking, bending, and all types of destructive sounds. That lasted for nearly a minute, with the sound moving continuously from one side of the town to the opposite. And then it stopped. I got up from the ground because I went into a prone position as soon as I heard the buzzing sound. As I got up and looked around, I could faintly see my neighbors getting back up on their feet as well. Then I walked closer to a spot where someone was shining a flashlight. There was a hole the size of a car tire on the side of a house. I proceeded to follow the natural direction of what made the hole would have traveled to, and sure enough, there was an exit hole on the other side of the house. I quickly walked back home, and on the way I could see all of the houses were hit by this whatever had made the holes. My jaws were dropped to the floor when I arrived home. There was a hole on the second floor, right at the spot where my bedroom is located at. Mom hugged me as soon as she saw me. I assured her that I was okay, then proceeded to head up to my room. The chair in my room didn't look much like a chair anymore. Whatever did that was traveling at such a speed that its shockwave had smashed all the windows, and the state of my room was a literal war zone. Had I stayed in my room when the power went out, my body would have been pulverized from the impact. That being said, the real carnage of the incident was in full display the next morning. I saw cracks on the walls of my room, which I failed to catch in the darkness of the previous night. Also, my PC monitor, the glass side panel of my PC tower, and as well as my PS4 were all smashed up. Then I saw my neighborhood through the new hole in my room. As it turned out, pretty much every single houses on our street were hit by the mysterious projectiles. I went out and took a walk around town. Well, no houses have been spared. Looking back, it's incredible how no one had been killed. It was out of sheer luck, of course, but there were only a handful of minor injuries. However, what's even more shocking is how the aftermath was handled. The police, fire department, utility people, and even the insurance people had come out to inspect all the damages. The thing is, they were in such a hush-hush mode about the whole thing. They refused to elaborate on the damages and what might have possibly caused it. They seemed to be more scared of speaking than the actual devastation. Here's the thing, I'm not saying that they should have the answer for the incident, but it's just the way they acted, the way they avoided even making eye contact with the residents. It was just too much. It really felt like they were ordered to keep their mouths shut. Lastly, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention about my uncle trying to publish our story a couple of days thereafter. My uncle worked as an editor at a local newspaper. Strangely, he couldn't even pitch the idea of the story, let alone get it published. I'm trying to make a point that the incident in our neighborhood might not have been some type of a naturally occurring freak incident, nor was it the first time that it occurred. It's obvious that someone with great influence doesn't want the story to come out. We still have the old photos of all the houses that were damaged, but we've never managed to have our story published anywhere. And that is that. The incident did not repeat in our neighborhood, and everything was brushed under the rug. End of the story. I worked at a self-storage facility some years back. My job entailed allowing in the people who should have access to the facility and of course denying access to those who shouldn't be there. The main building was pretty big. If memory serves, I would say that it's the size of 2 regulation basketball courts. With that said, my main area of operation was separated from the main building. We had a small booth situated right at the gate, so that's where the car stopped. I would check the IDs and let the people in and out. I should also mention that the day shift people worked in pairs, while I worked alone since I did the night shift. I stayed in the booth until midnight, then the routine was to do 2 sweeps of the storage area at midnight and at 4 a.m. We didn't really have people coming after midnight, but if they did, there was a big button right outside of the booth that would make the speakers in the storage building go off with an ear-bursting alert. So yeah, that's how I made the sweeps of the facility. Talking about sweeps, there was this one night when we had the alarm go off in the main building while I was inside doing the sweep. I put my hand on the taser gun, ready to draw, and slowly walked toward the rear entrance, which would be the only place that could trip the alarm. Some seconds later, I came across another corridor where I had to make a left to get to my destination. As soon as I turned, the lights flickered. I heard banging noises coming from all the storage rooms as though there were people inside and they were hitting at the metal roll-up doors. I quickly drew my taser gun. I was looking in every direction, both panicked and scared. Then when I looked straight forward, I saw a person standing at the far end of the corridor. Only, I don't think it was a person. The lights were going crazy, the alarm was so loud, and the banging noises magnified the insanity of the situation. It was tough for me to discern what I was looking at. At that moment, for whatever reason, I continued to walk forward. It was all instinctive, and I don't really think I was considering other options. A few nerve-wracking seconds later, the person, or maybe I should say the figure, is suddenly charged at me. My finger pulled the trigger of the taser before my mind could register what I was doing. Again, it was all instinctive. The figure was right in front of me. In less than a second, then it passed through me as though it was made of smoke or fog. Then all of a sudden, all but the alarm was no more. The figure was gone, the banging had stopped, and the lights didn't flicker any longer. I was ready to get out of there, but something caught the corner of my eye. One of the storage doors was slightly ajar. I went up to it to take a look at it, but stopped short of looking inside. I went outside after that, finished my shift, then waited in my car until the manager arrived. When Paul, the manager, arrived at the facility, I spoke to him about the incident during my shift. I did change the story a bit when it comes to the figure. I just told him that I saw a person, but the rest of the story was told in full, especially the part about the storage door being slightly ajar. We walked into the main building after the conversation. I took the manager to the storage room in question, and then he proceeded to open the door. At first, we didn't see anything strange or suspicious. However, the manager lifted a large piece of fabric that was placed on top of a tall item, and then he asked, "Is that a person?" To which I answered, "No, that used to be a person." What we found was basically a mummy, not an Egyptian mummy, but what I'm saying it's basically how the body looked. I don't know the full detail of how the whole thing wrapped up, but I do know that the person who rented the storage room was arrested. It was a case of a son who kept his mother mummified after she had passed away. The man stored his mother in a self-storage facility after he was evicted from his apartment for months of unpaid rent. Also, it wasn't murder. The authorities concluded that the mother had died from natural causes. One final thing I want to mention is the security camera footage. To my surprise, it captured everything. Would you care to guess how the police and the manager reacted to the footage? I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. Well, they said that the footage had been corrupted and that the figure in the footage must be the son. They uttered those words with a straight face even though everything else on the screen was displayed as they should. And even as the figure literally passed through my body as though it was made of nothing. I didn't opine on the matter. Of course I said nothing. All parties involved in the incident knew it was best left alone and to be never spoken of again. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's how the incident came to a conclusion. It was merely a case of a corrupted video. The story I'm about to tell you happened some 12 years ago. I was coming out from a Best Buy after shopping for an HDMI cable. I was walking towards a parking lot when I saw a truly sad-looking boy sitting inside a pickup truck. I remember clearly till this day that I, for whatever reason, slowed my steps, took a closer look at the kid until I almost came to a halt. But then I stopped looking when a man came into view and hopped into the driver's seat of the pickup truck. I continued walking at normal pace, got inside my car, then drove home after that. I forgot about the whole thing for the remainder of the day. I did some chores and spent time with my family. I kept myself busy. I remember changing the HDMI cable on my daughter's computer monitor, playing catch with my son, and cleaning out the gutter. And then came nighttime. I was on the bed, my wife was next to me reading a book, and suddenly I remembered the kid at the parking lot. I remember where I had seen him. I had seen him on the news about a week ago. The report was about a boy's disappearance, a possible kidnapping. The boy in the pickup truck was still wearing the same clothes the parents had described on the news report. I bolted off the bed, grabbed the phone, then quickly dialed 911. I explained the situation to the operator, to which then I was transferred to someone else and eventually was connected to a detective. I gave him as much detail as I could of the incident, and we also met in person the next day to speak face to face. Sadly, my tip came in a little too late. The boy was never found again and the case went cold. The experience still haunts me till this day. As a parent myself, it was extremely painful for me to think about what the boy must have gone through to look so sad and distraught sitting inside the old pickup truck. I was filled with guilt for not recognizing the kid. I thought at the very least I should have jotted down the plate number of the vehicle. I went into depression after that, needed a year of therapy, and was on medication for 2 years. I'm okay today, but it's not like I ever stopped thinking about the boy. I look at my children and how well they've grown up over the years. As much as I'm thankful, it still pains me of knowing that the boy was never given a chance to blossom. And that's it. I just needed to speak to someone about this, at least in writing, to get it off my chest as much as I can. Although, I'm not so sure that it's even possible. I'm gonna stop right here. Thanks for reading. Goodbye. I work at a call center and been working there for the past 10 years. One day, this was about 4 years ago, I was at work and taking calls, doing the usual. At around 11 a.m., I had just ended a very difficult call and was headed out for a smoke break. I went outside through the rear entrance and found a couple of my coworkers taking their breaks. One of them was Judy and the other was Charles. We struck up a casual conversation and it all seemed normal for a minute, but then something happened. I saw an aura emanating within Judy. When I say aura, I think it almost makes it seem like it was something beautiful, but beautiful it was not. It was grayish in color and the light was shining inward rather than outward as one would expect. Anyway, I rubbed my eyes thinking that I was seeing things, but I wasn't. Charles looked normal just like my hands and the rest of my body. The grayish aura was only seen on Judy. I tell you, it was the most peculiar thing ever. We finished our breaks and headed back inside the office. By then, the aura on Judy was no more. So I stopped thinking about what I had seen and went back to taking calls. The next day, when I went to work, everyone in the office were gathered in small groups and they seemed to be having some sort of serious conversation. I joined one of the groups and asked them what was going on. I was told that Judy had passed away. She died in a car accident on her way home from work yesterday. Of course, right off the bat, the first thing on my mind was that weird aura on Judy. I had never seen something like that on a person. I'm not one of those people who had paranormal experiences since childhood. I'm just a very boring, regular person. The good thing is that I hadn't experienced anything similar since then. I say it's good because I don't want to know when people might die. I mean, think about it. Even if you have such an ability, how do you put it to use? Do you just approach a stranger or even someone you know, then tell them that they'll die today? It's the most useless ability I could think of. It still baffles me why I was able to see what I saw on that day and only on that day. It's kind of scary, but at the same time, I really want to know why and how. But yeah, that happened to me one time. A couple of years back, I was at the lowest point in my life, ready to crumble at the slightest of touch. I've been laid off from a company that I have worked for the last 11 years. My wife left me for another man and she even took our dog with her. Anyway, I moved out of our home and ended up moving into a crappy apartment. I didn't have much of a choice at the time. It wasn't as if I was drowning in money after the divorce settlement, lawyer's fees, and most importantly, the loss of my job. From day one, something didn't feel right about the apartment. I couldn't sleep well and always woke up feeling like I had ran a marathon the previous night. At first, I chalked it up to my stress level being high. I mean, I wasn't living a celebrity lifestyle before the divorce, but still, I used to live in a decent 3-bedroom house with my own space in the basement, garage, and the backyard. It was not a bad life. Thus, when you compare that life to the life in a rundown apartment in one of the crappiest towns in my city, it was bound to be a stressful experience. That being said, my situation improved a lot in the next 2 months. I had a new job and also managed to save enough money to finally get my car repaired. Things were slowly getting better. I definitely became more optimistic and felt good overall. Unfortunately, however, I still wasn't sleeping well. One day, I went through the boxes from the old house that I hadn't unpacked yet. I was looking for my point-and-shoot camera so I could record my sleeping pattern. I managed to find the camera, but it left a sour taste in my mouth. You see, it was the camera that I bought for the first trip that I had taken with my ex-wife after we got married. I didn't want to remember that. Regardless, I connected the charger on the camera so I could keep it running for as long as the SD memory card capacity would allow it running. Then I went to sleep. I reviewed the footage the next night when I came home after work. The first hour, everything seemed normal. Aside from me moving around quite a lot, there seemed to be nothing out of the ordinary happening on screen. However, everything changed around the 1 hour and 20-minute mark. The blanket was slowly moving on its own. It was as though someone was gently pulling it towards my face. But the issue was that there was no one there physically moving it. After a minute or so, the blanket rested on my face and I could see myself removing it after some time had passed. The same pattern repeated for hours until 4 a.m. when the blanket stopped moving on its own. Naturally, I was freaked out. I slept in a motel the next couple of nights and let me tell you, I slept like a baby even though I was still scared from what I saw on that video. Just for a second, forget about the blanket moving on its own. If you think about it, it was no wonder why I wasn't sleeping well. This was during winter and my blanket was thick and heavy. The heating in that crappy apartment was minimal, and so I needed a very warm blanket. Now imagine someone placing that blanket on your face while you're asleep. You would obviously have a hard time breathing. Having said that, the problem wasn't the thickness or the weight of the blanket. No, the issue was that the blanket was moving on its own. As crazy as it sounds, I have to say it, that apartment was haunted. There's no other way around it. And yeah, I ended up moving out the next month since I was on a month-to-month lease anyway. I moved into a slightly better apartment in a slightly better neighborhood, and I haven't had sleeping problems since then. I'm glad to report that whatever spirit roams that apartment hasn't followed me to my new living accommodation. I hope it stays that way, and I hope they end up demolishing that haunted building soon. It can't be done soon enough. I was talking to my boyfriend on Google Hangout the other night. In the middle of the conversation, he went, "Is that your mom in the background?" And I said, "Shut up. That might have worked the first couple of times, but I'm not falling for it anymore." Let me explain the situation. I live alone and I get scared quite easily. My boyfriend takes joy in scaring the heck out of me, and so he's pulled that "oh, look who's behind you" nonsense in the past. And yes, I did fall for the same trick a couple of times. So going back to the story, my boyfriend responded, "Ginny, I'm not kidding. I saw someone walk past the fridge. Are you sure there's no one with you in the apartment?" I was already a little scared, and it really annoyed me that he tries so hard when he knows that I don't sleep well if I get spooked badly enough. I didn't shout it out loud, but I did respond somewhat loudly as I said, "I don't believe in ghosts, they're not real, they don't scare me, you don't scare me at all." And that was followed by loud popping noises and buzzing sounds, while at the same time the power had gone out. I grabbed my phone, then ran out of the apartment screaming like a lunatic and didn't stop running until I was all the way at the ground floor. From there, I went to the convenience store down the road and stayed there until my boyfriend came to take me to his place. I was in my PJ and slippers, but I could care less. I went back to my place the next day with my boyfriend. There, we found that the light bulbs had all exploded. That's probably what made the popping sound. Also, one of the power outlets looked brown. It was burnt, and this probably what made the buzzing noise. I should also mention that the circuit breaker switches were all tripped. As for any sign of intrusion, there was none. There was no sign of anyone picking the lock, nor could anyone climb the wall of an apartment to the third floor, not that I know of. Okay, there are several questions I could ask at this point. One, did my boyfriend really see someone behind me, or was he mistaken? Because he swears he saw a person by the fridge only a couple of yards behind me. Second, was the power surge a coincidence or did something cause it? Because the fact remains, the light bulbs exploded and the power outlet burnt out right after I spoke some gibberish about not being scared of ghosts. And finally, is the figure that my boyfriend saw somehow responsible for all that's happened? Regardless of the answers, I don't think I can live in my apartment any longer. I'm staying at my boyfriend's for now, and I think I'm gonna stay with him for a while longer. The thing is, even if I can find a new place right now, I don't think I want to be alone. Life after college wasn't supposed to start with a haunting, but here we are. When I was very young, from the ages of 3 to 6, I used to see things that others couldn't. Well, at least that's what my mom tells me because I don't really remember those things. I'll give you a few examples of those incidents. She tells me that I would ride the bus with her and tell her that a man was standing right in front of me and staring. The problem was that there was no man. Mom told me that half the bus was empty and thus nobody was standing. There was also this one time when I told her that I saw a little boy hurt and bleeding by the side of the road. There was a heavy traffic at the time due to a car collision that had occurred a few miles down the road. Mom told me that she saw a news report later that day about a boy that had died in the earlier vehicle collision. Now imagine raising a kid who sees those things almost every day, and you might be able to understand the set of challenges I brought into parenting. Nonetheless, my peculiar habits or abilities, whatever you want to call them, well, they've stopped once I turned 7 years old. Mom tells me that it just stopped one day and I never did it again. I'm 29 years old today and I'm the poster child for the definition of the word normal. I'm just so average in everything and very comported. I like following rules and I don't particularly enjoy deviating from the norm. I'm very average. With all of that being said, my life was turned upside down a few days back. I went to work like any other day. I took the bus, got off the bus, then walked to the office, and right as I was about to enter the office building, I saw a woman lose balance and about to take a tumble. So I did what anyone else would. I quickly ran up to her and tried to help her, but her body just went through me. She wasn't a person. A couple of onlookers outside looked at me strangely since all they saw was me running towards the nothing and acting as though I was trying to support an imaginary person. Just imagine how crazy that might have looked to an unsuspecting observer. It's happening to me again and I don't know how to stop it. If it's something that I must live with, then I must learn to distinguish the reality from my mind's creation. As of now, I'm really not sure whether what I'm seeing are beings from different planes or if they're merely visual projections of my imagination. But whatever the case may be, I have to learn to distinguish them, or otherwise I'll never be able to fit in with the rest of society. Am I crazy, or is this perhaps an optional feature from God's people factory? I don't know, but I really wish I could turn it off if possible. I just can't figure out what I did to deserve such a curse. I really don't deserve this. No one does. My grandpa used to live with my family way back in the day when I was only a boy. I didn't know it at the time, but he had terminal cancer and was living out the last few months of his life. I was told by my mom much later in life that Grandpa was a very spiritual man. He wasn't a follower of any major religion, but he was big on meditation and he also believed in the existence of a greater being. Having said that, I came home from school one day and saw Grandpa waiting for me by the porch as I got off from the school bus. I said, "Hi Grandpa," and he told me to come and sit next to him. I did, and we talked for the next half hour. I used to love asking him questions about his days as a captain of a container ship. It was such a blast to hear stories of heavy storms out at sea and near-miss accidents. An hour seemed like a minute whenever I chatted with him. He was a great storyteller and just the best grandpa ever. Anyway, after about half hour, Grandpa asked me who was standing by the mailbox. I looked and there was no one there. So I told him there was no one, and I remember him saying, "I think my time to live is fast approaching. He looks very impatient. I think he wants me to come already." I didn't understand what he was saying at the time, but I think he knew he would die soon. Because that night, we all went to sleep, but Grandpa never woke up again. He had passed away overnight, very peacefully and probably in his sleep. I think Grandpa really saw something on the day that he passed away. He saw some type of a being who was there to guide him to the next chapter of his journey. When he spoke those cryptic words, he didn't look scared or hesitant. It was actually the opposite. He looked zen and almost as though he was looking forward to move on. A few days ago, I realized that it's been some time since I even thought about Grandpa. I haven't gone to visit him at his grave for the last 3 years. There was always some excuse about my children, job, and just life in general. Well, today I was going through some old stuff from my childhood. Mom wanted me to clean up the basement of all my things, so I went over to her place, and in the process of cleaning up, I found several photos I took with Grandpa. He was a very interesting man. I really wish I could have spent more time with him. Anyway, I thought I'd share the story of his passing while my memory of that day is still fresh in my noggin. Love you, Gramps. In the summer of 2008, I went camping with 2 of my cousins and a few friends of theirs. I was 14 at the time, Charlie, the younger cousin, was 12, Max, the older cousin, was 18, and Max's friend Pedro and 2 others were 18 as well. Charlie and I were pumped since Max never really took us anywhere. You know, it's kind of cool to hang out with your older brother or cousin. But we should have known better. Max was nasty from the get-go. Turns out, he only took us camping because his mom, my aunt, told him to do so or else. So Max really didn't like us being there, and they treated us like we were a piece of trash. His friends weren't much different, for the exception of Pedro. He was the only guy who would speak to us and also made sure we were keeping up with the group. The time was about 11 in the morning, and we had been walking for about 2 hours already. Max told the group that he knew a spot, but it seemed like he was lost, meaning we were all lost. So we stopped after another 30 minutes of hike and began discussing our options. The older guys were talking about compass, directions, the sun, and whatnot, but in the middle of the conversation I chimed in, why don't we first go back to where we came from, then try to look for a different spot. At least that way we'd know where we are. Max dismissed the idea with just a simple no. After a while, the older ones decided we were going to continue searching for the spot, and that if they couldn't find it, we would just camp somewhere with a nice view. After another hour of hike, we were completely lost. We had clouds hanging over our heads, and with dense canopy trees to add to that, it got dark real fast in the forest. Technically, I can't fault Max for the clouds since there was no rain in the weather forecast, but still, I kept repeating in my head that he should have listened to me when I said that we should first go back to where we had began our hike. And then the bad circumstances piled on from that point on. Rain started to come down, and one of Max's friends sprained his ankle as he slipped on a large boulder. So I told Max that we should set up camp and stay dry until the rain stopped. Not to mention his friend needed to rest his ankle for a little while. The idiot refused to listen. We continued to hike, but at some point, the rain began pouring like mad. I had never experienced rain like that. Between the wind and the rain, I could hardly keep my eyes open. It was that intense and powerful. We were bombarded by nature for the next 20 minutes or so. All we could do was to lean against a tree, cover ourselves with our backpacks, and hope that the storm passes. The rain was gone in time, but it wasn't the only thing that had left us. When everything settled down, Charlie was nowhere to be seen. We looked for him everywhere and screamed his name out loud in every direction, but nothing. Charlie was just gone. His backpack, baseball cap, and his water bottle, they were all gone with him. We managed to find our way back to the base of the mountain and eventually got in touch with the local police. There was a massive search the next day, but they couldn't find a single trace of Charlie anywhere. The search continued for a week to no avail. The day of the camping was the last time I saw Charlie. I wish I could tell you that Max became a better person after that, or that at least he became an alcoholic because of the guilt, but nothing like that happened. Max's parents, my uncle and aunt, they were never the same after losing Charlie. Max, on the other hand, he went on to live his life like nothing had ever happened. I saw him hanging out with his friends and making out with his girlfriend only a week after Charlie's disappearance. If I ever saw a psychopath, It would have to be Max. How could I, the cousin, be more devastated for the loss of Charlie than the brother of Charlie, who is Max? How is that possible? Suffice it to say, I never dealt with that guy again. I avoided any family gatherings that included Max, and I made sure that my younger brother never spoke to that psychopath. I still think about Charlie from time to time. Even till this day, I'm unable to erase the haunting memory of Charlie being so happy that his brother took him camping. It didn't matter how nasty Max was to him. All that mattered to him was that he was there with his brother. I'm so sorry that I couldn't protect him. I still miss him a lot. I work in an office situated on the ground floor of a 5-story building. The thing about our office is that it's enclosed in glass for the exception of the back entrance. So essentially, anyone who walks by can see right through our office. Working in that office is okay for the most part, but there are times when you feel a bit uncomfortable. The story that I want to tell you is the perfect example of why. So about a month ago, I'm in the office by 9 a.m. and straight away I begin working on a project that I couldn't finish on the previous day. I got off my chair at around 9:30 to grab a cup of coffee at the back of the office, and right away I had this weird feeling of being watched by someone. I turned my head to the right, nothing. Then I turned to the left and I nearly soiled my pants. There was a very creepy looking man staring right at me. I looked at him for maybe 3 seconds, hoping that it would sense the awkwardness and leave. It didn't happen, and so I went straight to the manager, then told him about the creep. John, let's just say that the manager's name is John. Well, John walked outside to try to talk to the man, but as he was turning the corner, the man left on his own. Now, it would have been okay if that was the end of it, but this went on for the next 3 days. The creep would come by and stare at me 2 to 3 times a day. He would leave only when the manager went out to try to speak to him. Then came the weekend, and I didn't have to deal with the creep anymore, at least for a little while. Unfortunately for me, the creep had come back on Monday. By Tuesday, I lucked out a little when I saw a couple of policemen walking by. I jumped off the chair and ran straight to them. I stopped them and asked for help. I explained the situation to them and asked them if there was anything they could do for me. The response was very disappointing, although perfectly understandable. The cops told me that they'll speak to the man if they ever see him watching me, but that legally, they couldn't do much to stop him. I mean, it isn't illegal to watch someone in public. The odds of the police catching the man in action was slim to none. The creep kept coming back to watch me 2 to 3 times a day. That went on for another 3 days, and I truly began to worry for my safety. Until then, my coworker walked me to the subway, even though he doesn't take the subway and he usually walks home. But for how long could I ask him to do that favor for me? I had to find a different solution to my problem. So then, as a last resort, I had my boyfriend come pick me up every day after work. He was more than willing, but I felt bad about it. You see, the drive from his home to my place of work takes a little over an hour. It's not easy to do that every day, but still, that was the only way I felt safe leaving work. It was after about a week since my boyfriend had begun picking me up when finally the creep stopped showing. As happy as I was about the whole thing, I gotta tell you, it also freaked me out like you wouldn't know it. Think about it, the creep stopped coming only after my boyfriend began picking me up consistently every single day. That means he was probably watching me go home from somewhere where he couldn't be seen by me. I still get the chills when I think about what could have happened to me had I been too late to ask for help. I could have been abducted for all you know, and God knows what the creep would have done to me. I love my current job, but I think I have to play it safe and go work somewhere else, preferably somewhere where I can't be watched by creeps. I went through the bad boy phase for quite longer than most girls I know. I think it started from way back when I was 8 years old that I always had the hots for bad boys in general. Well, that ended when I was 27 years old, and it was my boyfriend of then who ended it. That ex-boyfriend's name is Aiden, and I'm going to tell you a story about him. I met Aiden at a restaurant during a lunch meeting with my coworkers. He gave me the stare for a couple of minutes, then came up to our table and asked for my number. Aiden's tall, handsome, and rugged looking. He was perfect in my eyes. Anyway, we met up the next night. He took me to a fancy restaurant, a type of restaurant that I had never been to or ever will from here on. When we were done with dinner, he took me to a bar that was just as fancy, and I was driven to those destinations in a Ferrari. Up to that point, I had never seen a Ferrari in person, let alone ride in one. As you may imagine, I had fallen head over heels for him, and we ended up getting physical very fast. I'll be honest, I had pretty much lived at his place from day one that we had met. He wanted me there, I wanted to be there, and so I stayed there. During the first week together, I learned that Aiden was unemployed. In fact, it seemed like he had never worked before in his life. All the money he had and was spending was coming from his parents. He himself told me so. Whatever the case, I was enjoying the high life. Not only was I living in an apartment that had 2 floors inside, but Aiden also bought me anything I wanted. In the first 30 days that I stayed there, he bought me a kitchen knife that cost close to $7,000 only because I enjoy cooking. He also got me a set of golf clubs because he felt that we should golf together. Then there was the necklace, ring, half a dozen bags, and you get my drift. He was literally pouring money on me. With time, however, I began to realize why he was spending so much money on me. It was to hide something. Perhaps I should say to dull the shock of learning the truth, instead of saying that he was hiding the truth. I think he always knew that the truth would come out sooner or later. You see, behind the rugged exterior of an extremely wealthy man, there was a feeble, easily scared and offended little boy hiding under the skin. Aiden couldn't function without certain chemicals in his body. By the way, I'm not talking about medications for mental illnesses. I will never disparage people who need those types of medications in order to live a healthy life. No, Aiden was taking chemicals that you would generally buy off the streets. That's just a figure of speech, by the way. He actually had a seller come to him. He was a big client, a big buyer. That being said, on certain bad days, the chemicals didn't quite jive with him. He didn't get angry or violent on those days, and in fact, you might even say that he became more mellow and easier to deal with. If Aiden felt that the chemicals weren't doing what they were supposed to, he took much less of them for a few days, and on those days, you would see the real Aiden. He was so afraid of the world that he refused to go outside even for a minute. He would tell me that he wanted to chill at home, but it was obvious that he wasn't the same person when his chemicals didn't cooperate. He would cling on to me all day and tell me to skip work for the day. Stupidly enough, I ended up quitting my job because Aiden asked me to. He wanted me with him and by his side 24/7. For the next 2 months, Aiden became more and more dependent. From that point on, it was more like raising a child than dating a man. I cooked, cleaned, and shopped for him. I had become a nanny. And you know what else I had become? I had become addicted to money and the high life that really wasn't mine to begin with. Then one day, a girl knocked on our door, and the timing was perfect as well. It was one of Aiden's good days, and he had gone out to take care of a few chores. Anyway, the girl's name was, let's just say, Jane, and she was actually Aiden's ex-girlfriend, the girl he went out with before he met me. Jane and I spoke for nearly an hour, and it had become clear to me that I was going through the same things that she had. Jane was an average person like me. She didn't hail from a wealthy family, nor was she a millionaire. No, she was just plain old Jane. She too had become a nanny at one point and eventually broke up with Aiden. The problem, however, was that she changed her mind and wanted him back. She wanted him for all the wrong reasons too, as it was the money and the high life that she couldn't give up. That was a wake-up call for me. In the girl, I saw the person I was turning into. Before I met Aiden, I had a good job and a stable social life. I was hitting the goals that I set for myself back in college, and I was slowly becoming a person whom I can respect. That being said, after months of dating Aiden, I was unemployed and all I did was to clean up after my boyfriend. I barked, rolled, and gave my hand every time Aiden would throw a wad of cash on my face. Let's face it, I was a pet. I told Jane that she could have him, then broke up with Aiden when he came back from his chore. He begged and cried at first for me to give him another chance, but I told him to shove it and proceeded to pack up my stuff. Just as I was ready to step out of the apartment, Aiden had a snarky little smile on his face as he said, "You'll come back. They all do." I responded by giving him the middle finger and stepped out of the apartment for one final time. It's been 5 years since that day, and no, I hadn't gone back to Aiden, even though that psycho had called me dozens of times before I blocked his number permanently. He begged and cried and sometimes yelled at me. I cannot for the life of me understand how I let myself go to the level of a gold digger, if only for a few months. It took me a solid 12 months to get back to where I was before meeting Aiden. Imagine what trash I might have become had I stayed with him the whole time. Actually, you don't have to imagine. That girl, Jane, yeah, she was being played by Aiden even after months of me dumping him. I know that because I kept in touch with her for several months after the breakup. I wanted to help her to get back to her old self by telling her of the improvements that I was making. But it didn't work, so in the end, I cut off contact with her and I don't really know what the heck happened to her since then. My experience shows you what happens when a delusional loser has money and influence. It's scary to think of the things he'll do once he inherits his father's fortunes. I'll be praying that his family goes broke before that, for all of our sakes. I moved into a new house recently and have been making some minor improvements to it here and there. About a week ago, I hired an electrician to install a motion sensing light by the garage. The light was bright and it did what it was supposed to do. All was good. Fast forward 3 days, I'm at home and looking outside through the living room window. It was nighttime and the only light coming from my house was the porch light. So I'm just standing there and thinking, wow, I actually did it. I finally bought a house. I was very proud of myself for meeting the goal 2 years early and I was just enjoying the moment. After I had enough self-adulation, I was going to go back to my room to get some sleep. However, the light from the garage turned on and that got my attention. I thought at first for it to have been triggered by some sort of an animal, but when I looked outside, there was nothing. By the way, the living room has a large bay window installed. I could easily have the view of the garage if I poke my head right up against the window pane. Anyway, 30 seconds later, the motion sensor light turns off on its own. I'm thinking I've probably missed the animal passing through. So I turn around, but then the light triggers on again. I quickly look outside and nothing. I stood there watching the light turn on and off for the next 10 minutes. It just wouldn't stop. So eventually I gave up and went to bed. The next morning I called the electrician and had him check the light while I was at work. I got a call from him a couple of hours thereafter and was told that the light was working just fine. That said, the electrician was kind enough to replace the light with a new one for peace of mind. Nighttime on the same day, I pulled up a chair next to the window in the living room, and I also had a cup of joe to keep me company. A few minutes into the observation, the light in the garage turned on again. And God knows why, but I was actually giddy that it was happening again even after changing out the lighting system. I went outside to witness the event live and without a single blind spot. I waited for about a minute, but then something unexpected happened. Instead of my garage light turning on, I saw the lights turn on at my neighbor's house, the one across the street. They too had a motion sensor light installed, as most of the houses do in my neighborhood. Then one by one, the garage lights of other homes on the street began to turn on. It was basically a light show in the middle of the night. The same thing still happens fairly often in my neighborhood. It seems like everyone knows that it happens, but no one questions the why. I spoke with the electrician and even had a chance to speak to a cop that was patrolling the neighborhood. But every single one of them seemed rather uncomfortable discussing the subject. I'm still curious about the entire neighborhood lighting up from time to time. I would love to know the answer to why and or how, but not at the cost of looking like a nutjob. So I'm dropping the issue, but hopefully some of your subscribers might have something to add to the story. I very much hope so. I was coming home from work this one night. I don't recall the exact time, seeing as how this happened some 10 years ago. Anyhow, it was quite late and the streets were pretty empty. I remember parking my car a block away from my apartment and walking toward the front entrance. That's when I saw a little girl standing there. I stopped in front of the girl and asked, "Hey kid, where are your parents?" To which she answered, "Mom left me here all alone." So then I said, "Do you live in this apartment? Is there anyone I can call for you?" But then she repeated the same answer. "Mom left me here all alone." I had no other choice but to call the police. I pulled the phone out of my pocket, searched for the local police number that I had saved, then proceeded to make the call. While I was on the call, I took my eyes off the girl for maybe 5 seconds. But somehow, in those few seconds, she had disappeared. I asked the police officer on the phone to hold for me for a second, then began to search for the girl. She was nowhere to be found. I had to tell the officer on the line that I was mistaken about seeing the young girl. It wasn't true, but I had to say it. After ending the call with the police, I searched for the girl for another 10 minutes. I just couldn't believe that she could disappear like that without my knowledge. I mean, I was right next to her, and again, I took my eyes off her for maybe 5 seconds. I went up to my apartment after the search. The first thing I did was to take a shower, and then I nuked a Hot Pocket for a late night snack. I sat by the dining table filled with the thought of the little girl. I couldn't eat, so the Hot Pocket was getting cold. And then I remembered. I knew the girl from the old apartment. That apartment was run down, and the lives of its renters were in similar condition. Run down? I often saw the young girl playing in the lobby by the entrance of the staircase. She always wore the same purple jacket during winters, and she had blonde hair. Okay, so I remember her. That's fine. But there is a problem. She's not supposed to be alive. The girl actually died while I lived in that apartment. I don't know the cause of her death, but I remember there were rampant rumors about her mother, things I'd rather not repeat. Point is, I shouldn't have been able to see the young girl on that night. That encounter was the first and the last time I had seen the little girl. Nothing weird happened after that, but I still wonder how and especially why she came to see me on that night. I never spoke to her when I lived in the old apartment. I didn't know her. Oh well, I guess some things you just don't have answers for. There used to be this kid named Jake in my school, and he was kind of despised by everyone. The reason being, he looked as though he hadn't taken a shower in years. He smelled, he was awkward, and he was just different from the rest of us. One day, I unfortunately was paired with Jake to do a project for a science class. To make things fair, I told him that he should come to my place one time and that I would go to his place the second time we worked on the project. Jake agreed. We had finished about 80% of the project at my place. Then the weekend came and it was my turn to go to his place. I packed up my stuff and was dropped off by my mom at his place in the afternoon. Jake's house looked exactly the same as Jake. Dirty, unorganized, it looked more like a crack den than a house. I rang the bell, his mother came out, so I put a big smile for her and told her that I was there to do a project with Jake. She scanned me up and down a few times while saying nothing to me, then screamed for Jake to come downstairs from his room. Jake took me inside and we began working on the project in his father's office. Actually, I should say in his late father's office. His father passed away not long after Jake was born, supposedly. I should also mention that Jake's family must have been pretty wealthy at some point in the past. The house itself was big. It looked hideous due to the lack of maintenance over the years, but it was located in a part of town where only the wealthy lived. But yeah, we are in that big and serious looking office working on our project. I think I was cutting a piece of cardboard box to make a display board for our presentation when I began seeing weird things happening around the office. At first, it was just a painting falling off a wall. Innocent enough, it could happen. Then moments later, a pencil rolled off the table. Nothing too alarming. What happened next, however, it wasn't so innocent. We had something like 8 different colors of Sharpies on the table. Not long after the pencil rolled off the table, I saw all 8 Sharpies rolling off the table, but they were rolling all in different directions. I sprung off the chair, put my stuff in my bag, then walked straight to the front door. I opened the door myself, then put enough distance between me and the house, all the while Jake was following and telling me that I was overreacting. He pleaded to me not to tell our classmates about the incident. I told him I wouldn't for as long as he went back inside the house right now and called my mom to pick me up right away. I stood by the sidewalk for half an hour for mom to arrive. When she came, I couldn't hop in the car and leave the area fast enough. The school project was a mess, but I didn't care. As for Jake, it seemed as though he wasn't fazed at all about the little incident in his dad's office. I believe he must have seen a ton of whole lot more bizarre things happening in that house. That's the only thing that would explain his nonchalant reaction. I never told anyone about the incident at Jake's. Not that it would have mattered since Jake never made friends with anyone anyway. But still, I kept my promise and that was the end of that. I've never involved myself with him ever again, and I'm good with that. In order to tell you my story, I have to give you some details about myself. I'm in my early 40s, married with 4 kids, and thus I've got a full house. With that laid out, one night a couple of months back, I was in the garage repairing my lawnmower. The repair took me about half an hour, and during those 30 minutes, the house was in a pandemonium with all 4 children running around and going nuts. Believe it or not, I'm always thankful that my home is so loud and lively. I see many parents nowadays really hate to come home and have to deal with children being children. For me, it's always been a joy to come to a loud and happy home. But yeah, I'm done with the repair and about to go inside the house, but suddenly, the power goes out and we are plunged in darkness. I felt my way through the garage, found a flashlight that I keep in the tool chest, then entered the living room. I thought the kids might get frightened and was ready to put on a cape to let them know that Daddy was there for the rescue. Strangely, however, the house was dead quiet. I called for my wife and each of the children, but no one answered. I thought it was a weird time to pull a prank on me, seeing as how Sarah, our youngest one, gets quite scared when the power goes out. We had it happen to us twice last year, and Sarah slept in our room for the next 3 days, even though the power had come back on the same night. In any event, what was happening was so strange that I actually went outside to check out the neighborhood. Sure enough, the entire town was pitch black. I went back inside and began walking around the house while calling for my wife and the kids. I was everywhere, even the basement, but I couldn't find anyone. As you may imagine, I was very concerned and began to panic a little. I went to my office and got a hold of my phone. When I turned it on, I noticed right away that it had 0 signal bars. I asked myself, is that possible? Don't the cell towers have backup batteries? Regardless, I gave up on the cell phone and walked toward the kitchen where we have the landline phone connected. I picked up the phone and was going to dial my wife, but even the landline was dead. There was no sound coming from the earpiece, nothing at all. It was at that point that I got really scared and I was really about to cry for the first time in my adult life. Folks without children could never understand the feeling. I once lost my oldest one at the mall for only 10 seconds, and I never felt my heart sink deeper than in those short moments. Just imagine your entire family disappear after a blackout. For a father, that's a worse nightmare scenario than being eaten alive by an alligator. The next thing I did was to run toward the front door so I could go outside and try calling for my family. When I was at the door, I grabbed the doorknob, turned it, then as I opened the door, the power had come back, but not the way you would imagine. In my house, when the power goes out, then comes back, we hear all types of noises coming from different types of gadgets. For example, my printer in the office makes loud noises as it boots up, the dehumidifier in the basement kicks in, so on and so forth. This time, however, there was none of that. It was like instant on and off. Not to mention, right off the bat, my children were running around and screaming, and my wife was busy cooking something in the kitchen. To me, it was as though they had appeared out of nowhere. What I did next was to grab all 4 of my kids and corral them to the kitchen. In there, I pulled my wife toward us and gave all of them a big hug. My wife asked, "Where's this coming from?" I just smiled and said, "I'm just so happy that we're a family." I haven't told this story to my wife. I just think it's too weird and she would never understand it unless she experienced it firsthand. Not that I want her to. Anyway, I've got a solar and backup battery system installed in the house now. I don't ever want to experience anything like that again. Ever. Last month, I had to make a long drive from New York City to South Carolina. My sister had moved there and she and her husband could only take 2 of their 3 cars. I volunteered to deliver the 3rd car so I could check out my sister's new place and also to spend some time with her family for a few days. On the day of my little trip, I woke up and did the usual things to get ready for the day. I was going to have scrambled egg for breakfast, and so I opened the fridge. I could have sworn I bought eggs only a couple of days back, but they weren't inside the fridge. Strange, I thought, but what are you gonna do? I settled for milk and cereal. When I was done eating, I grabbed the milk carton so I could put it back in the fridge, and voila! The eggs were sitting pretty on the top shelf inside the fridge. How could I not see it before? I thought. I was a little miffed, but there was no time to cry about it. I had to leave. I took the lift and arrived at my apartment's basement parking lot. I walked over to my spot and there it was, my loyal steed waiting for me. I call it my steed because it's a Mustang. I know, dumb. Anyway, I hopped inside the car but jumped out right away at the sight of something unfamiliar. It wasn't my car, or at least it wasn't for those 2 seconds that I was inside the car, because when I got out of the car, I saw that it was actually my car. You may think I'm crazy, but I'm telling you, I saw an infant car seat in the back. That's what made me jump out of the car because I don't have a kid. Nevertheless, as I told you, it was actually my car, so I thought I probably saw something that wasn't there. It was spooky as hell, but there was no time to dwell on it. It was time to leave. I went to my mom's where my sister had left her car. I left my car parked in front of my mom's driveway, hopped inside my sister's car, then began my drive to South Carolina. This is the point where things get truly weird. It takes about 12 hours to drive from New York City to South Carolina under normal driving circumstances. So if I left my mom's at 6 a.m., then I should arrive at my sister's approximately at 6 p.m. The time of my arrival at my sister was 9 a.m. Yes, it had taken me 3 hours to drive all the way from New York City to South Carolina. What's more, I don't recall much of the drive. I remember getting inside the car and taking the highway after some 5 minutes. That's all I remember of the drive. Hence, my watch might have said 9 a.m., but to me, it was more like 10 minutes had passed and I was at my sister's. I'm not sure if my experience was a glitch in the Matrix type of incident, but it sure as heck was a weird thing to experience. I spent the entire day yesterday at home with my boyfriend. That's, according to Philip, my boyfriend of 3 years and going strong. He has got no reason to lie and is not the type to play silly pranks on anyone. But the thing is, my memories of yesterday is very different from what Philip remembers. In my reality, I dropped off my car at the dealer for the regular maintenance, and then I took the bus to my parents to pick up something from my room. My old room, that is, the room that my mom and dad are now using as sort of a storage. What freaks me out is that Philip's memories of yesterday seem to be the correct one. I checked the maintenance book on my car and I didn't see a new stamp for my supposed visit yesterday. I also called my dad and asked him if I had gone to his place. He told me to get a grip and to get my head checked up. He was kidding, of course, but the point is, I didn't go to my parents yesterday. I couldn't get any work done at the office today. The whole day, all I could think of was what didn't happen yesterday in reality, but had happened in my head. I can't stop the thought that I've somehow ended up in a different reality, one that isn't mine. Because otherwise, how do you explain my memories? I remember everything so clearly. I remember seeing mom and dad. I remember grabbing my old desk lamp and as well as my old book. I vividly remember my dad giving me a lift to the car dealer later that day. I haven't been able to kiss or touch Philip the same way I used to since yesterday. Reality tells me that's my Philip, but my heart says otherwise. I don't know how I'm going to deal with this going forward. I wish I could wake up tomorrow and be able to say, oh my, that was a freakish nightmare. I really hope I'm writing this in my nightmare.